The vehicle built for drivers who never back down. It didn't care how confident you sounded, how strong your reputation was, or how many wins you claimed behind the wheel, because the moment hesitation appeared, the machine exposed it without mercy. This was not a car designed to reassure, to soften mistakes, or to rescue pride, but a machine that demanded commitment so completely that only those who never backed down could stay in control. To understand why this vehicle earned such a ruthless reputation, we have to return to a time when driving was still treated as a confrontation rather than a collaboration, when engineers believed that courage and consistency matter more than comfort, and when machines were built to challenge the driver instead of adapting themselves around insecurity. From the very first mile, the message was clear. This car would not negotiate. Steering was heavy and immediate, transmitting every surface change directly into the driver's hands, forcing constant attention and eliminating the luxury of casual inputs. Throttle response arrived without delay, not violently, but decisively, demanding certainty rather than exploration. There was no space for doubt. Every input needed intention. Every correction needed confidence. The car punished indecision more harshly than aggression, because hesitation created imbalance, and imbalance was met instantly with consequence. Lift at the wrong moment, and weight transfer punished the rear. Second-guess a corner, and momentum made the decision for you. Drivers who approached it cautiously struggled more than those who committed fully, because half measures confused the car, while clarity allowed it to settle into a rhythm that felt brutally honest but deeply rewarding. This wasn't recklessness. It was resolve. Early testers described the same sensation repeatedly. The car felt alive only when driven with conviction. Anything less and it felt hostile. There were no second chances built into the experience. No systems to reinterpret fear as caution. No assistants waiting quietly in the background. This machine assumed you meant what you did. Those who hesitated stepped away shaken. Those who adapted stayed silent, almost respectful, as if they had passed an unspoken test. Because this vehicle didn't ask whether you were ready. It waited to see whether you would back down. And if you did, it answered immediately. That uncompromising philosophy would define everything that followed, turning this car into a legend among a very specific type of driver, and a warning to everyone else. Because once you committed to it, there was no space left for doubt. What made this vehicle so demanding was not raw aggression, but the way it forced drivers to confront their own commitment in every single moment. Because once the car was loaded, once weight had transferred and momentum had chosen direction, there was no option to reconsider without paying a price. Unlike machines that allow drivers to test boundaries gently, this one required belief before proof, demanding that inputs be decisive rather than exploratory. Drivers quickly learned that confidence alone was not enough. Confidence without follow-through became hesitation. And hesitation was punished more severely than overconfidence. On fast roads and track surfaces, the car revealed its true nature. If a driver entered a corner with absolute clarity, steady throttle, and a clear exit in mind, the chassis settled beautifully, rewarding commitment with grip that felt almost magnetic. But if the driver questioned themselves mid-corner, lifting abruptly or correcting late, the car reacted instantly, shifting balance so sharply that recovery demanded full focus and precise timing. This behavior unsettled many experienced drivers because it challenged habits they had built in more forgiving cars. They were used to probing limits gradually, leaning on safety nets, and adjusting instinctively when things fell uncertain. This car refused that conversation. It wanted a decision, not a discussion. Engineers later admitted that the vehicle had been tuned this way intentionally, built around the idea that clarity of intent was safer than ambiguity, and that decisive driving, while intimidating, created more predictable outcomes than half commitment ever could. In their view, hesitation was the real danger, and the car was designed to eliminate it through consequence. Owners who stayed with the car began changing how they drove everything else. They planned corners earlier. They committed sooner. They trusted preparation over reaction. The car had reshaped their mindset. It filtered drivers not by bravery, but by resolve. Those who needed reassurance left. Those who accepted responsibility remained. And among those who remained, a quiet respect formed, because they understood that the car was not trying to dominate them, but to demand honesty from them. It asked one question repeatedly, with every input and every mile. Are you certain? Because in this vehicle, uncertainty was not an emotion, it was a mistake. And that realization pushed the relationship toward its breaking point, where only discipline could carry forward. Over time, the vehicle began doing something few machines ever managed to do, because it didn't just test driving skill, it tested psychological endurance, forcing drivers to confront how they respond when pressure refuses to ease. Long sessions behind the wheel revealed that this car was less about moments of bravery and more about sustaining conviction, about maintaining clarity lap after lap without allowing fatigue, doubt, or emotion to dilute intent. Drivers discovered that backing down was rarely dramatic. It happened quietly. A slightly later brake, a fraction less throttle, a momentary lapse in focus, and the car noticed every one of them. As fatigue crept in, the machine felt sharper, not because it changed, but because the driver did. The same inputs that worked an hour earlier now produced instability, reminding the driver that consistency was the real challenge, not aggression. This wasn't a car you could muscle through mistakes. It required presence. Track instructors observed something unusual. Drivers either improved rapidly or walked away entirely. There was very little middle ground. Those who stayed learned to manage their own energy as carefully as speed, understanding that hesitation often came from exhaustion rather than fear. They learned when to rest, when to reset, and when to stop, because the car would not compensate for a mind that had begun to wander. The vehicle didn't reward heroics. It rewarded discipline maintained under pressure. That discipline changed drivers fundamentally. They became calmer, more deliberate, less reactive. In other cars, they felt patience replace urgency and planning replace instinct, because once you've driven something that refuses forgiveness, you stop relying on luck everywhere else. The lessons transferred beyond the cockpit. Manufacturers rarely build cars like this anymore because they appeal to a narrow audience, one that values growth over comfort and responsibility over reassurance. But for those who experience it, the vehicle left a permanent mark. It showed them that courage is not about never feeling doubt. It's about acting clearly despite it. And as stories spread, the car's reputation sharpened, not as something fast or dangerous, but as something honest to the point of discomfort. That honesty would soon define its legacy completely, because machines that demand this much commitment don't fade quietly. They wait, unchanged, until the next driver decides whether to back down. In the end, the vehicle's legacy had nothing to do with speed, specifications, or lap times, but with the uncomfortable self-awareness it forced on anyone who tried to master it for more than a moment. It exposed a truth many drivers prefer to avoid, that backing down is rarely about fear of the machine, but about fear confronting one's own limits when excuses are no longer available. This car never pretended to be kind. It never promised safety through softness. It offered clarity, and clarity can be brutal, by demanding full commitment. It stripped away the illusion that progress comes from confidence alone, replacing it with the understanding that discipline, preparation, and consistency are what actually keep control intact when pressure builds. Drivers who learned this lesson didn't just become faster. They became quieter, more focused, and far more honest with themselves. That is why this vehicle never became popular in the traditional sense. It didn't flatter, it didn't adapt, it didn't forgive, but it endured. Among those who never backed down, it earned something far more valuable than praise. It earned trust, because once a driver proved they could meet its demands without retreating into hesitation, the car responded with a balance that felt earned rather than given, a partnership built not on comfort, but on mutual respect. Nothing was hidden, nothing was softened. This machine stood as a reminder that progress does not always mean making things easier, and that growth often requires resistance rather than reassurance. In a world increasingly defined by assistance and automation, it represented a different philosophy entirely. One where responsibility could not be delegated. One where control had to be practiced. One where backing down was the only real mistake. That is why its story still matters. Because machines like this don't just test how we drive. They test who we are when commitment is the only option. So, what do you think? Are we still building cars that demand responsibility, or have we decided that backing down should always be an option? The